Everybody, welcome back. Thank you again for joining us. We appreciate your patience as we work through little hiccups getting started. So we're going to be picking up where we left off last week. So you got my reference material. We've got our first pass done. For those of you who were with us last week, fumbled around a little bit with this. Again, like I do this a lot of the time when I paint because I don't paint. I don't have one single approach to painting. I sit down and I work, and I let the skills and the experience that I have kind of guide me along the way. And I go into the paintings with a plan, but that doesn't mean anything. Like, you know, it's like once you start working, the reality of the piece kind of takes over, and you have to be able to troubleshoot. And again, I talked about this last week. That's the importance of an education. Like, I'm not shaken or bothered by the fact that the painting isn't going to plan and that I've got to make adjustments right in the middle of things. I'm completely comfortable with it. So you kind of see me doing that. And it's important to understand that what you're seeing is not my knowledge, but my experience. When I'm able to just kind of start one thing and change and go into a different direction and pick it up, go somewhere else, that's purely experience. That's not the knowledge base that I work from. That's years and years and years of doing this and knowing, kind of getting a sense that I'm doing something and it's not going to give me what I want. And I recognize it while I'm working, and so I stop, change directions, take another direction, so that when I finish the first pass, it's staged for the second pass, right? I'm thinking when I do the first pass, where does this painting need to be so that when I start the second pass, everything is in place. And that's my goal when I'm working on the first pass, to get it to the doorway to get it ready for the second pass. And so now it's basically ready for the second pass. I'm actually going to be starting by managing the background first. I want to get the face done, and that's really the goal for tonight, is to get the head done, possibly her armor, and if I fly through it, which we don't seem to be moving at a fast pace through anything we're doing here, if I fly through it, I may even do the planets down in here. I have a feeling that's going to wait till next week, but I never really know. So it's going to be the same color scheme. You can see I've set up my palette. I've worked from kind of darker, bluer violets into lighter, cooler, like bluish violets. And so I don't want it to match the background. I want a little bit more purple in the skin. And so I'm not matching the photograph directly. This isn't like a real thing. I mocked this up in Photoshop, and Photoshop has its limitations. It's a quick knockout, and you'll see like the values. I've created a scale that kind of match the photograph, but they're not going to align with the painting, right? When I go in, like the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work on this edge, not in these highlights out here, but in here. And so whatever the value of the painting is that's down already is going to function to hold the place of all my shadows. So I'm just going to go a little bit lighter than that. And so whichever value that is, that's where I'm going to start. And then I will use the remaining string of values to go darker or lighter based on what I need. I know like my darkest light is right in here. So whichever one of these shades hits that, I'll then scale away from it and get lighter in my lights. And again, like in my shadows, I want to let the painting, that's what's already down, hold the place of most of the shadows. I will go in and I'll accent around the mouth to pull out some details, the nose and probably the eyes and eyebrows a little bit. But I'm going to try to leave as much of the shadow that's in here to be managed by what's already down. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be smooth and match the photograph. It just needs to function to hold the place of shadows as I build in my lights. And I'm probably not going to go back and refine it beyond that. I'm just going to leave it like that. That's a technique we call vacant shadows. But I'll probably leave it just like that. It'll be elegant. It'll stay in the background of the painting. I'm not going to let my lights get too bright because I don't want this head competing with what's up here. Part of what I've done is I've left the head very cool and what's up front very warm, because worms tend to pull forward. Not always the case, but they tend to. They tend to pull forward. I've not made this extremely warm and extremely cool. I've allowed some of these worms into the skin, which is why I'm not going with just a blue face. A blue face would glue this head all the way back into the stars. I want it forward a little bit. But I've put some of these worms into the mountains and then into this. I've not put them into the planet, because they're really the planets are more connected to the space. I want the head to be a little separated, kind of connects a little bit more with the mountain range, and then to the figure up here. And again, I'm just playing with temperatures. Very warm, moderately warm, and barely warm, right? And so I'm also degrading the colors from very colorful to moderately colorful to relatively gray. These mixtures that I made started in grayscale. All of them, they started with grayscale, and then I started adding color into them. So as you can see, they're not very colorful here. And if I want to ramp up the color later, I'll do it at the end when I glaze. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to chop up my photograph. Keeping it like this and trying to manage it while I work doesn't make any sense. I want my subject as close to the place where I'm working as I can be. So I'm just going to cut this down so that I have access to just the parts I need. Now, I have a second copy of this sitting on the easel beside me over here. It's a Bob Ross trick. He always had a finished version of his paintings sitting right off screen. And so I've got that there so that I can refer to it in any of the things that I cut away here that I might need to connect what I'm working on, right? So again, I have this very small head that I've just cut out. I don't have any of the pieces down here or anything out here, but as I'm working, if I find that I need this little bit of connective stuff going up against like the gun in the piece, I have the reference material just to my left. And again, I highly recommend getting comfortable cutting up your reference. Good to have 2 copies, but I recommend cutting up your reference as you go, keeping it close to the thing as you work. It's just easier. It's easier to work on something when the reference is nearby. So I'm just going to tape this up here. Normally, I'd also have a full-size print. This print, I didn't get around to printing something full-size, but it would be an actual 1-to-1. It just makes it easier. Even if a figure in here has a 1-inch head, a 1-inch print gives me an easier thing to reference as I'm working. So I'm going to start by figuring out what shade that is. And I'm thinking we're somewhere in here. This one might work. So I'm going to grab just a tiny little bit of this. I'll lay it down here. I have to make a judgment call. How bright is that compared to? So this is a little bit brighter in relation to the background than this is. So I'm thinking I may actually have to go 1 step darker. I'm just going to wipe that off. Seal this. I'll go 1 step darker and I'll see how that feels. I'm feeling this actually might be just fine. Yeah, I mean, I think I can work with that. So that's going to be my my darkest light, and I'll probably wind up working my way somewhere to here. These may only get used for the brightest highlights out here, the highlights in the eyes, but I may wind up with this being my full range. I'll see as I go. Again, I'm working based on what I'm seeing here. Okay. So before I do that, I want to go in and I want to define the eyes, the nose, and the mouth a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit darker. I want to just drop those in, right? Because the images, I'm not able to like kind of creep up on the image and let you guys see what I'm doing. It would be easier to see if I were doing that. So if I just anchor those items to start, I'll then be able to stay out of the way. And even that's not going to cut it either. It's not dark enough. So again, I'm finding like the shade that I have here is not dark enough, and I don't want to go darker than that because I don't want to start getting blacks in the background. So I'm going to go back to the thing that I said was my darkest light, and I'm going to go around this eye. And it'll make sense the moment I start to do it. I'm going to go around this eye, which will help to explain the shape of the eye. It'll make the eye solid enough. Looking at the shapes of everything here, I got to make sure that I'm kind of working in negative right now. I'm putting in the lights in order to define the darks. So trying to pull out that eye by surrounding it by lighter shades. And then I'll kind of pull that down. I'll leave this eye alone. I'm just going to work, now that I'm kind of committed to building out the darker shades by putting the lights in around it, I'm just going to stay with that. And I'm going to work my way down the painting. I'm trying to clean some of this off. And I'm looking at the shapes of everything as I go. And again, just because I'm doing this doesn't mean I can't go back and make the eye darker later on. I'm choosing to work through the lights for now. I can always go back in and glaze them later if I see fit. And you can see this is not a big value jump, but it's noticeable. We definitely can make it out. It's clean. Right, we actually, this is for those of you who are in Evolve and kind of further along, this is Vacant Shadows, what I'm doing right now. Kind of a adjusted version to fit my needs. And again, all these techniques, we have them named, but they're just ways of applying paint, ways of thinking about building out a piece of art. And you can see I'm creating those shadows in the folds just by leaving the underpainting intact, just painting around it. Right? And this is a really nice technique. It's actually pretty quick. It's pretty quick to develop a finished piece of art. He's really only doing half of a painting. Right? You're only painting what's in the light. A value range. Because some of these things I'm painting are actually in shadows. This eye is mostly in shadows. There's tiny, tiny little bits of reflection stuff going on. But that's why I'm staying so close in value to what's already here.
Got a question for you, Kevin.
Yes.
So the background, is that redefining what your paint mixes dictate? Was it initially your dark shades when you were?
So yeah, it's actually, once I've got the background in, it kind of sets the stage for what comes next. So in a lot of ways, it's dictating what values I'm putting down. Right, if I want to put down something that reads as a light against the background, I can't just use the photograph as a point, as a definitive measuring tool. I have to look at the painting and say, well, what value is the background right now if I'm going to work against that, right? If I'm working with that as my frame of reference, what value is a little bit lighter? Because that's going to be my darkest light. I can't say, well, the photograph is a value 5, so that's what it has to be. I let the photograph give me a general sense of where I want to go, color and color-wise, and then I have to let the painting make its own argument for what belongs in the painting. Right? And again, it's just, I'm paying attention to what's going on here. It's not rocket science. As I'm doing this, I'm just paying attention. Like I made sure, like I tested which of the shades that I have functions within this space as it is as my darkest light. That's all I've done, nothing else. And so now I can just go in and I can build out from there. Once I know what that anchor value is, the one that connects this palette to this painting, right? So if this is a value 7, I need a value 6.5 or a value 6, something that will marry with this nicely. If it's too dark or too light, it's not going to do what I want. So the painting is dictating to a degree. Now, I have latitude. I have lots that I can do, I can play with here. But for now, that's actually the case. The painting is actually telling me where to start and where to end. The photograph is what got me to the palette that I have, but the painting is now telling me where to start and where to end as I'm filling. And again, I'm not looking to make this face. The photoshopped image is just reference, right? I'm not locked into, nor do I feel locked into painting exactly what's there. I'm going to paint based on the reference. I'm using it as groundwork to guide me, but it's nothing more. I'll paint it the way I see fit. If I like, and it's not going to match this, but it'll look like the same girl, but it's not going to match the photograph. And then when I'm done with it, if I decide I want to do something else with it, I'll glaze into it, or I'll play with it until it's what I want it to be. But at the moment, the reference is merely a point of departure. It's nothing more. I'm not locked into it. I'm not slavishly copying it. I'm using it to guide me so that I'm not inventing it completely out of my head. And my angle is a little bit funny here. I have to kind of lean in a little bit to see the drawing. Again, this is just, part of the stuff that you deal with when you're all set up to do live streams. My angle is not good on a lot of this, and so you'll see me kind of bobbing back and forth, where if I stood up and I painted, it would be readily obvious to me just because of the angle of the light. You just see me kind of bobbing around a little bit here as I work. Once I've got some of these marks down and I know where everything goes, then I'll be able to just sit back and just kind of play with it. It'll take me a few minutes to get there. And all I'm doing is I'm kind of outlining some of the major structures here so that I don't lose them as I move this forward. And I'll go in and I'll be obviously blocking them in a much more aggressive manner later on, but I do want to get some of these things anchored, right? In here, which is here. A little bit of extra light in there is kind of hard to see around. And again, I never really know how much to share. So as I'm working, it's like you'll hear me be like, oh, yeah, what did I just do? Or I can't see this, or I can't do that. I try to make a point of sharing that stuff with you because most people, when they sit down and they paint, they have these internal dialogues. They struggle a little bit trying to make sense. Things don't work. And it's so easy to get an impression that a professional, somebody who does this all the time, that it just rolls off the brush. They touch the paint and they touch the painting and it does what it's supposed to do. It's just not the case. We fumble around, we play, we move the paint around. We do it confidently because we've been doing it a while. But a mess is okay. I have a friend, I was actually thinking about this today, because I think about the live stream and what I'm saying, and how much should I give? How much should I share in that type of a thing, right? Because you could easily take it and say, well, this guy is just fumbling around until he gets lucky and then stops. Right? Or you can look at it and say, well, this is what painting is, right? It's a constant calculations, and I hate to use the word struggle, but it's a struggle to get the materials to do what you want it to do, to make sense of what you're looking at and bring it in line with your vision. Right? And so I remember there's an artist that I know. He's a very, very good portrait painter. I mean, just an incredible portrait painter, classically trained by Nerissa Simi in Italy. Just an amazing painter. And I remember he was showing me a painting that he was working on. It was just a woman, a face with a pair of hands, kind of in front of her face a little bit, and then long gloves. And he had painted down to the elbows. Now, this is a guy, he does proportional drawing like 7 days a week. I mean, this is all he does. Drawing from life, painting from life. There's a lot of that. Very well practiced, knows what he's doing. And he shows me the thing, and he starts to say to me, oh, these arms are way too long. Now, the arms weren't just a little long. They were like ridiculously long. But that was his sketch. That was what he, as he started building out the initial painting, because this is on the canvas, that's where he landed as a starting point. He could see they were wrong, but he hadn't gotten around to fixing them yet. And it's like, for me, I think we all have the imposter syndrome, like as we're working. And I think the better you get, the worse it gets. It's like, for me, I didn't go to school for this. I wasn't trained. And so anytime something's not working, I start questioning, whether or not this is the place where people start to realize I'm a fraud. I mean, it's kind of funny, but I think a lot of professionals kind of land there. We do it whenever we start to struggle with something a little too much. And I just remember thinking, like, this is a guy, my friend, this is a guy, this is like his thing, his area of expertise, like it's every single day. And for him to be so off proportionally actually made me feel better about what I do. Not just simply because I realized, like, the same struggles that I have, he was having too. And he would resolve it in exactly the same manner. He would just stay with it until it was what it was supposed to be. And so for you, when you're painting, that's why I'm sharing what's going on in here. I don't keep it inside of my head. I voice it so that you have as good an idea of what I'm dealing with as I work as you can possibly have, because the struggles are probably going to be similar for you, whether you're working on your own or you're in the Evolve program in exercise 3 of block 1. It doesn't matter where you are on the journey. You're always going to have these things going on. And if you feel like you're alone in it, you feel like you're alone. And if you realize that everybody else that's doing this is having the same fight, they're fighting the same fight every day, you start to realize that there's probably a good chance, not just everybody around today, but every single great artist through time, all of them, David and Michelangelo, and they all struggled with the same things. And it's like, there's something, to me at least, there's something comforting in that, in knowing that I'm not alone in the daily struggle as I work. So that's why I share as much as I do about what I'm thinking as I go. None of it shakes my confidence. I know that I can make the painting what I want it to be, just given the time, right? So we do have time constraints here, which puts a little bit more pressure on me, but I'm never afraid that I'm not going to be able to deliver, right? And again, all I know is all I have to do is just work long enough, and it'll come together. Really steal this painting for future.
Dark Star shared here, I came in at the right time. I've been fighting this lately. And Rhiannon said, it resonated with me too.
Good. I mean, I try to share because I remember what it was like when I was younger and I was just starting to figure these things out. The challenges that I felt, and it's like, for so often I felt alone in my in my fight. Like I felt like I was the only one who didn't know what they were doing. I mean, of course, I was spending time around other professionals. I had started to build a career for myself, and all of my artist friends were pros. And they all made it look so easy to me. And the truth is that it wasn't easy for them. They were doing the work just like I was. It was easy for me to buy into the idea that it was easy for them because all I was seeing was their finished work. And I gotta be honest, like, you guys can't imagine how little preparation I do for this. I show up and just start painting. I mean, it's like, Daniel's
Yeah.
laughing back here. I
It's
literally
true.
just, no plan. It's terrible because, like, when I work on my personal work, it is so well planned out, it's so organized and so structured. And here, I'm just kind of showing up and just painting. And it's, I shouldn't be doing that because it causes all kinds of hiccups and bumps in the road, and for nothing. There's no benefit other than a little bit of comic relief. Just the angle on this is so bad I can't see anything. You know, we set up for it and I thought I had a better view. So I've decided, rather than trying to do like kind of outline this, I'm actually just going to block everything in. All my lights, I'm going to kind of block them in and then start just painting right into that and see how that goes. To be honest, I don't even know if it's going to work. We shall see, I guess. Am I blocking the view over here, Daniel?
No.
Am I okay?
Oh, you're good, yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to get a better angle on the pencil drawing that's underneath. Again, if I were doing this, this thing would be sitting in my lap. I'd be rotating it.
Kevin, if it's easier, if you want to just stand up for a little while, you can go ahead.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, I have such a clean view of it from up here. Make life a lot easier.
Yeah, so we have a few overhead lights right now, and Kevin sitting down at a lower angle is catching a lot of the glare, where when he stands up, he sort of can see things from without that glare. And it also helps to be able to step back and take a look at your work. See things from a bigger perspective.
These lines are very, very hard to see, just the angle. I was going to wear pajamas in today. I'm glad I didn't. Actually, one of those days has been raining all day.
Yeah.
It felt like a pajama day. Yeah, for 14 years, I've been saying I was going to do that at the school. And I just, every day when I think to do it, I'm like, no, I can't. I have to look like a presentable adult. One of these days. Live stream just seems like a better place to do it. That does.
Rhiannon is wondering if you'll be keeping the head all soft, or if you're going to be adding any sharp edges, making it nice and crisp.
I haven't decided yet. I'll see how it feels as I move it further along.
You could get away with sharper edges, considering if you're going to follow the reference there, then the values would be muted, the colors
Yes,
would be muted.
I can leave the edges razor sharp because the colors and values set the face back into the distance. So I have the choice to do whatever I want with it from that standpoint. I'm not going to be locked into having to make soft edges in order to make it fall back. Right, because we have three moving parts, and each one of them has an effect on creating the impression of something being further away. The first one is edges. Sharp edges pull forward and soft edges fall away. We also have value, or when we think of value, we're thinking contrast. So the shadows and the lights on the objects up front are going to be very far apart on the scale, very dark and very light. And then the objects are further away, the shadows are going to be more subtle and the lights are going to be more subtle. So if you think on a value scale, 1 being white and 10 being black, the stuff up front might be a 1 light highlight and a 10 darkest shadow, but the stuff that's in the distance could be a 4 highlight and a 6 shadow. They're very close together, so you don't have that contrast. That makes the thing fall back as well. And then, of course, color. Warms pull forward and cools recede. Again, that's not an absolute, but generally speaking. And additionally, higher chroma, meaning more colorful things pull forward and things that are grayed down fall away. And so when you're putting together a painting and trying to make something look like it's further away, you're playing with all three of those tools. You can have razor sharp edges if your contrasts are very small and your chromas are very low, right? And the stuff in the background is cool and the stuff in the foreground is warm. You can leave the edges razor sharp, right? And if you go into museums and you look at a lot of the old masters, their edges are razor sharp. In Europe, they didn't come around to the idea that that soft edges created the impression of depth. They didn't come up with it on their own. It actually came from Japan, the Japanese watercolor paintings, which is pretty cool. But you can see when, like, if you go into a museum and you look at older paintings, particularly landscapes, mountains will be razor sharp, but the contrasts are low and the chromas are diminished, and the paintings look like they just go on forever as far as depth is concerned. Yet the edges are all razor sharp. It's not till later on that they started manipulating the edges for that effect as well. So I can leave the edges really sharp if I want, or I can soften them. It depends where I want this face. For the most part, I think I'm going to leave the face right where it is. I'm going to leave it nice and sharp because it doesn't require anything else. It doesn't require anything else to fall back in space.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
How many likes on this live stream would it take to get you to come in wearing pajamas for the next live stream?
Oh, I don't know. What's a good number? How many likes do we normally get?
You know, I'm not exactly sure. I know that we usually, at this point in time, we usually have about 70 viewers on the live stream. Mm-hmm. So I feel like maybe we could challenge them a little bit. I think 100 maybe. See if they get their friends to come in, like the stream.
How about if we do 150, I'll be in pajamas the next week. How's that?
150, everybody.
150, okay.
Go get your friends.
So I'm actually running into a bit of a problem here. Wow, this is just, I swear these live streams, these are just to test me. They really are. The board, I didn't seal the board. I shouldn't have had to. But the board is just absorbing the paint. The paint is dragging on it. I'm actually being forced to put a lot more paint on than I wanted to. I should have sealed the board, but I didn't. And so there's a lot more absorption of this paint, the oil, into the layer that's already down. And so the paint is dragging a bit. It's not fluid and kind of gliding on the surface like I like. Not a big deal. It's manageable, but it's not what I was expecting to walk into today when I was painting. I didn't expect this level of absorbency. Not a big deal. I have to adjust the way that I'm putting the paint down, which isn't a problem. The paint is going to wind up heavier than I had originally planned. So I'm going to be doing a little bit more like what we would call puddling to build this up. It's going to be kind of like a mixture of what we call puddling and vacant shadows. But my hand is being forced. And again, it's okay. It's not a big deal. But I personally, I prefer to be able to come in and tell the painting what I want to do, not the other way around. Had I sealed the painting, it would have locked everything down, and this paint, I could thin this paint down and it would just glide across the surface, which is how I'm more comfortable. It's more the way I work. And again, it's like, a lot of these things, and I feel like I need to say, I don't do this stuff anymore, right? I'm just like kind of dusting off old skills and kind of coming out here and performing. I don't do this anymore. And in fact, I don't really get to do paintings that often. I do, occasional commission work, but for the most part, I teach these days. And so I'm out of practice. And I know what I'm doing, but I'm not practiced. I'm not in shape for this. And so I'm making kind of like amateur mistakes. I should have sealed this board. It should have been absolute coming into today. I didn't do it. As we do more and more of these, you'll see me tripping up less because I'm going to get my process for doing all this stuff down. But it's good. You're here at the beginning and getting to see me kind of figure this stuff out as I go. Again, it's not doing exactly what I want, but it's not going to stop me from getting the result. I just have to adjust what I'm doing as I'm working in order to get what I want.
In that same vein, we have a question from Carl.
Yes.
Would you suggest that others just come into a painting like you tonight? Does it build any particular skills? Or is planning a better way to go in almost all cases?
Until you really know what you're doing, always plan. Right? So there's a couple of things. One is that if you don't plan, you are guaranteeing a struggle, an unnecessary struggle. But also, if you have a plan, right, and this is actually critical for learning, if you have a plan, you're going to go from here to here to here to here. Once you start to get off the plan, you know that you're not on your plan anymore. You're not walking on a path, you're off in the weeds. The second your feet hit grass, you know, okay, I'm not on asphalt anymore, I'm doing something wrong. And it kind of catches you, and you can be able to course correct and get back on the path. Also, let's say you go and you follow this idea and you get to the end of the painting and the painting doesn't work out. If you didn't have a plan and you just painted, you might not be able to figure out why it didn't work. But if you had a plan and it didn't work out, and it was an organized, structured plan, you knew exactly what you were going to do and what you would expect from it. If it doesn't work, you might be able to figure out why it didn't work. And that's going to make your life a lot easier. It's going to make it possible for you to then take that information and grow with it. It's harder to grow when you're just seeing what happens when you work. I can do that now because I've just been at this forever. And again, like I'm doing this, there's no guarantee this is going to work, right? No guarantee. I may have to do 2 more passes over this to get it where I want it to be. Now, I know how to do that, and so it'll work out. But if you don't know how to do all the other things to fix the mess, better off staying with a very straightforward plan. Don't just wing these things. Again, it's a confidence bordering on arrogance to just casually show up and jump in. Right, so at this point, I'm just trying to split the face into one value for light, one value for shadow. And once I've got that done, then I'll figure out the rest of it. I'll be able to then just build up my lights, push back my shadows, and round everything out and get this where I want it to be.
Oh no, Kevin, they just roped me into it too.
What?
I also will have to wear pajamas if they can get 150 likes before the stream ends.
How are they going to manage that?
I'll just appear in the back. We'll figure it out. Got a question for you though.
Yes.
How do you come up with color combinations?
Well, I mean, for starters, I'm taking photographs, so a lot of these things are defined. I'm not making them up. I am making adjustments, but I'm not really making the stuff up. It's defined by nature, a lot of it, right? So that's a starting point. I mean, it's defined by nature. Like the photo reference for this, what color are rocks? I mean, kind of earthy, so that's the color I picked. What color is space? It's blue. I have photographs for this. I'm not inventing it. Her face, I was just looking for something between what was in the planets and what was in the sky. I didn't want it to match the sky necessarily, but I wanted to be in the same general color family. I wanted to stand out, but not really jump away. And so this is just where I landed. Again, most things are defined for you, right? It's just nature, right? Most of the things you're painting, they're going to be things you find in nature, and so you don't really have to think too much about what they should be. At least, to some degree. Again, like I could take this painting and I can make it all red. There could all be variations of red. Instead of a blue sky, it could be a red space. I mean, like I said, in this case, I'm just simply following what looks most like reality. Decided to bring up everything, so like even this side is now going to be made a little bit lighter. This is kind of...
Adding to that conversation, what about temperature shifts?
What about them?
Do you think heavily about how you manage your temperature relationships based on like light and shadow, for instance?
Yes and no. I mean, at this point for me, it's a lot more intuitive, and I don't. So for temperature shifts, I keep them very simple, right? Because you can get down, just like in rendering details, you can get down to rendering fingerprints on a hand, and it's like, well, is that really necessary? Right? Can't you make the point that it's a hand without the fingerprints, right? And so, like, where do you stop? And so I could have a broad range of temperature shifts in this face in the background, but do you need it? Right? Just because you can do it doesn't mean you need it. It doesn't mean that it helps. Often enough, too much detail ruins a good painting. Too much attention to those things can ruin a painting. But you have to have some, and so for me, the temperature of this figure in the background is a little bit closer to the temperature of the figure up front than the blue sky behind her. And that's all I've done. No calculation beyond that. That's it. Other than that, I've not made any changes to her. She's exactly the way she came off in the photograph. I colorized her to get her close to, kind of like in between the sky and this, and then I degraded the amount of chroma to set her back. And that's it. That's how we wound up with her. Again, it's easy to overthink these things and turn them into stuff that they don't need to be. I want to be careful not to do that.
Yeah, that's good. Simplicity is key. A question for you. At what point, if ever, do you put the reference photo aside?
When I no longer need it. At some point, I won't need it anymore because the painting is far enough along. All of the decisions that need to be made from the reference are behind me. And it's not that it'll go away forever. It'll go away until I get to the details. When the details come, I have to go back to the reference material to make sure that I'm placing them properly. because the details will be the last thing that go in. And so I will have to return to the reference material for that at some point.
And as for mixing colors, like when you go to mix colors, Kevin, what qualities of color do you start with? Like, what are you thinking first? Is it chroma, hue, temperature, value? What's the first few things that you start with to make a decision?
You know what? They all kind of go together, right? You can't think about the hue without the chroma. Like, I mean, it all goes together. Like when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about when I was mixing these, I'm thinking about a purplish blue that has a very low chroma, that's very gray, right? That's the thought. And so when I start mixing, it's blues and violets with a gray as a base, right? I could have started with a white as a base, but then the chroma would it'll be much higher. So I wanted to gray it down, so I started with gray, but it's all one thought. And then as I'm working, it's like, oh, I need a little more of this, I need a little bit less of that, right? You kind of, it's like making soup, you taste it and you're like, what does it need? And I'm kind of moving that along. And then this string is just, like there's variations, it's bluer here, and it gets more violet, and then it pales out and moves back towards blue a little bit. Right? And it's just a choice I made along the way, because I do need blue. It can't just be a violet head because it won't connect to this. There's some violet in here, but it's mostly blue up in here. So we need something that marries it back to the sky that's behind it. But yeah, all of those thoughts kind of go together. I don't do one and then the others like one at a time. They're all part of the same thinking.
Would your answer to that question be different in the context of teaching somebody about mixing color?
Maybe. Yeah, so teaching it, you have to make sense of all of the moving parts, right? So even when I talk to a student, and let's say they painted this, I would ask them, like at the end, is the value right? Are your shadows reading as shadows and your lights reading as lights? Not just relative to each other in the face, but across the painting. Does this thing read as a light and a shadow where it's supposed to be a light and a shadow relative to the whole painting? If the answer is yes, the next question is, are all of your edges in place? Are the sharp edges where they belong? Are the graded edges where they belong in order to create the impression of volume and mass and depth? If the answer is yes, we then move on to color. And it's like, are the colors right? And the colors being right is, is the hue correct? Is the hue doing what it's supposed to do? Is it marrying the face to the background? And then from hue, it's then chroma. Is it the right amount of color? And then finally, is it the right temperature? Right? And so we would go through all of those. It's not just a color thing. We would go through all of the moving parts. Right? When you first start learning with us, we do grayscale, and you're just dealing in values and edges. So are the shadows darker than the lights? Right? So that if all the shadows are darker than all the lights in the painting, it feels like there's a light moving across the subject. And then the second question is, are your sharp edges sharp and are your graded edges, are they properly placed? And do you have gradients where the form is being defined by these curves? And if it is, then that's the end of the questioning. When we move to color, we just add in the three components of color, which is the hue, the actual name of the color, like red, blue, or green, chroma, meaning how colorful the thing is, and then temperature, is it warm, neutral, or cool? And again, these things, they're all relative to the things around them, right? So cool is only cool if it's surrounded by warmer things, right? You can have something that's relatively neutral and you put it into a painting that's very cool, and that neutral thing looks very warm, right? And so everything is relative. So it's not enough to just manage it here, but to see in real time what it's doing when it moves up to the canvas. So we always walk back through the painting when we're trying to figure out if anything is wrong, if the painting is done, if it's done right. We always walk back through those same parts. Are the things that you applied properly, right? And that's, to me, one of the things, like when I teach, my opinion, I don't ever put my opinion into it. Like, I like the way this looks. I like the way you handled that, right? Until you really know what you're doing, right? When you know what you're doing, that's a way, like, around me, my students, when a student hears me say, that's really nice, I like that, that means that at least in that moment, they're beyond my teaching. Like in what they're doing, they've started to do things that are purely stylistic, but being done through a solid understanding of what they're doing. They've applied all of the moving parts properly, and now they're taking bold steps, right, to define what they want in a piece of art. In the school, for the most part, only the most extreme end of my students ever hear that from me. I would say, like in the school right now, there's one. I got one student who's probably heard that from me in the last couple of months. That's it. Everybody else gets by the numbers. The values are either right or they're wrong. The edges are right or they're wrong. The colors are right or they're wrong. And the students, they have this criteria for how they figure those things out, and it's always a conversation. Have you met the criteria? I don't care what your opinion is. My opinion doesn't matter either. I can like something, but if it's wrong, it's wrong, right? Imagine if you went and you were taking a class in calculus and the teacher liked your answer even when it was wrong, so gave you credit for it and patted you on the head. Like, that teacher would get fired pretty quickly. And I think one of the problems with art education is that teachers formulate opinions about what they like. And if they like certain things, even if they're a detriment to your growth, they're gonna pat you on the head and tell you they're very nice. Doesn't help anybody. So again, when I am working with a student, I teach them one way. It's a straightforward and quantified way of thinking about what they're doing. And then when we go through that work after they're done, or if they're struggling and they're not sure what's going on, we go through it with the same exact questions that I gave them the answers to, which we would think of as the education. So the questions are, exactly, I taught you how to do the values, so now I'm asking you, are your values right? I taught you what to do with the edges. Are your edges right? Same with color.
Cool. Thank you, Kevin. We've got two other questions here that are moving on to some different topics. Do you have any tips for making a reference like this and getting the lighting conditions realistic?
Sure. So starting point is, like, you have to understand, I have a really nice studio that I shoot in. I have a high-end camera. I've got tons of lighting equipment. I bought like paintball armor for this. I mean, so if you want to do something like this, there's an investment, right? You're not gonna break out your cell phone and use your lamps at home and put somebody in a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and wind up with this reference, right? There's simply more to it. And so, like, reference like this requires that all the stuff you're going to paint be in the photograph. Now, obviously, we don't have Saturn in our I didn't get to photograph that, but you can go to a stock photography place like shutterstock.com and you can get millions of images of just about anything you can imagine are available there. And so, but what I would say is, like, you want to get a photograph that matches what you want your painting to look like. If you look at my reference material, it looks like a finished piece of art. All I'm doing now is applying a technical skill to, I don't want to say replicate it, but to try to capture what the reference is giving me, right? And so I use it as a point of departure, and I'm going to build on it. And so you want to start with developing the skills behind a camera and having a studio. Studios are not that expensive to set up. A camera can be expensive, but the truth is, like, when you're first starting out, you don't have to buy anything high-end. You just need a decent digital SLR with a single lens that will work within the space you have, like a 50mm lens, which is a portrait lens. You can do that and it not cost you an arm and a leg. You don't get a brand new camera that was just created. You get one that's like a generation older. They're inexpensive enough. And then you have to have Photoshop. You have to be able to work with Photoshop or some other imaging software. So you have to learn how that works. And again, that's like $19 a month or something. You get it. And so again, it can add up, but it's like if you're serious about doing this, then yeah, I mean, it's just the cost of doing business. And then again, lights, you can actually get a pretty decent setup for just a few $100s. Like B&H Photo has lots of what they call spider lights. And all they are is the squiggly CFL bulbs, the little fluorescent bulbs, but they come in a housing with diffusers. And so you can get like a set of like 3 lamps with 2 diffusers and a couple of other things, and it'll run you just a few $100s. They're cheap. They're cheaply made, but if you're not a pro and you just need good light to shoot by, well, you can't do better than that. But those are, like I said, they're called spider lights. You can look them up, but they're not, and they can get expensive, but they start to become, when you start to get into higher quality. But you can put together a decent studio that way. You can also, if you simply can't do that, you can shoot outdoors, right? If you do a scene that's outside, shoot outside in the sun. You just have to pay attention to where the light is. You want to make sure that when you're shooting that you've always got, I would say, at least a third of your subject in shadow. That's a good place to start. It doesn't always have to be like that, but when you're first starting out, anywhere from a third to 50% of your subject should be in shadow. Like if you look at this, here's the light, look at all the shadow in here. This is maybe about 20% shadow, but there's a good amount of shadow on her face, and that helps to explain the form. And so you want to look out for that when you're setting up a photo shoot.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, and I would also say, as you, like in this painting, as Kevin stitches paintings together, keeping in mind how the different lighting scenarios play with each other so that everything is consistent that way is also really good. Another question in here. When painting a head and shoulders portrait and the background is the artist's choice, what is your thought process on choosing the background color to fit the subject?
Can you read that again?
Yeah. When painting a head and shoulders portrait, and you can make the background anything that you want, you get to decide.
Yes.
You, the artist. What is your thought process on choosing the background color to fit the subject?
Well, so, again, this is an experience thing. Like you look at the tones, you're like, what are you trying to say? A white background and a black background who do 2 very, very different things on the same figure, right? If you have a neutral figure and you drop in black or you drop in white, you wind up with 2 dramatically different paintings. Which one do you want, right? If I use let's say we do a neutral value background. Fire engine red at value 5 is not the same as like earth green at value 5. The impression is different, right? And again, also, you're going to have to manage the flesh tones for the environment, right? So if you have a very red background, the flesh tones have to be adjusted for it. If you simply paint a figure within an environment, then you have to come very close. Like the environment can't be a value 5 or a neutral gray space, and then you go with fire engine red, it's going to look ridiculous. But if you stay in neutral tones, neutral greens, neutral blues, neutral browns, like anything neutral will work. What I would recommend is that if you want to play around with adjusting your backgrounds, is again grab something like Photoshop, cut out the figure, and then just rifle through the colors and see what looks good. That experience of actually just playing around with it. Like you say, you just go into the red palette and just start clicking around and filling the background with red. All these different colors, darker, lighter, more chromatic, less chromatic. And Photoshop makes it very simple. And so if you do that, or even make a red background and then go into your color balance and play with that, you can adjust it in all kinds of directions. And again, hue and saturation is another one. You colorize the background, and then you can ramp up the saturation and play with what color you're dealing with. And again, it gives you an opportunity to just experiment a little bit. And there's no formula for this. absolutely no formula. There's what looks good. And it's like you get to choose that, right? It's your aesthetic. You have to understand how things work so that you don't grab something that breaks all the rules, and though you like it, is horrific from an art standpoint, from an understanding of how things work. Right? Because you can create something that's really dramatic, but that's arguably way too dramatic. Doesn't take into account like the client or the neutral tastes of most people, right? It's like if you want to sell your house, the first thing you do is get rid of all of the color on the walls, paint the walls white, because people might not like the colors you like, right? And so you want to be very careful when you're doing something like that. If you get to pick the color, just be thoughtful that that the extreme ends of the spectrum are a place for very particular people. And you want to know who your client is if you're working for a client. If you're working for you, then you do whatever you like. But Photoshop's a great way to play with that, to see what different variations would look like without ever picking up a paintbrush. And then you can also adjust the flesh tones to account for it as well. If something's very red in the background, you can add a little bit of red into the flesh tones. Keep playing with that, how much red you add in until the face feels like it's in the red space. Okay?
Rob is asking, what is the story of this character?
There is no story. This is just a painting of my daughter. Just to make a painting for you to watch. There's no story. It's not connected to anything like that. Actually, one of the students at the school, my apprentice. So I have regular students at the school, like I have a couple of hundred students here. But over the years since I became a professional, I've always had an apprentice, like Darth Vader. I've always, not always, but for a decent amount of the time through my illustration career and when I was doing portrait work early on, I'd always have apprentices. And they would be very close to me, and I would work with them and get them to a professional level before they kind of go out on their own. Very traditional approach, just like the old masters did. And it was my way of sharing what I had accumulated in knowledge with somebody who was very serious, because this is the kind of thing where it's like if they could waste your time, they really, really waste your time if they weren't serious. And so I would only do it with the most serious students, the most serious people. And so over the years, I've had many apprentices, and I hadn't taken an apprentice in a long time, very long time. And a couple of years back, one of the students in here approached me. Didn't know anything about the apprenticeships that I'd had, but approached me about getting her to a professional level. And I thought about it, because again, it's a lot of work. It's a real commitment. And I thought about what I thought she was capable of doing, what her work ethic was. And so I decided, even though I'm very close to retiring, that I would take her on as an apprentice. And she's actually she'll be the last apprentice I have. She's actually on the other side of studio right now working. But so I'm actually bringing that up because she's actually building a science fiction portfolio right now. And so all of this equipment was purchased so that she could start building that portfolio. She's got 3 paintings she's going to be doing using this gear. I'll probably, when she's going to be finishing her painting long before I do, so I'll show you her painting once it's done. Maybe next week we'll drop it up here so you can see it. But if she's here next week, maybe if she's done, I'll introduce you and you can see her work. But anyway, so since we had all the equipment, I thought, well, science fiction piece would be great. And so here I am, science fiction piece. But there's no story attached to it. It's just me painting. This is the kind of stuff I was doing for a living when I was in my 20s. I did science fiction book covers for a living. So this is what I did for a living when I was in my 20s. I miss it. It's fun. So I'm happy to kind of come back and jump in and play around with it in front of you guys. But yeah, it's not attached to any book, any novel or anything. It's just that I had this stuff laying around because I got it from May. Now, mind you, we'll be using it for a lot of things going forward now that it's here, but. Would have been a lot nicer rather than sitting.
It is 9:15, by the way.
9:15. Once I get past this initial part, this is going to fly. I say that every time, don't I?
Yeah, you definitely tend to pick up speed as you go, I've noticed. Sandra said, "Your daughter is a beautiful subject. I love it that you included her in your time."
Actually, it's her 16th birthday today. I came scrambling here, talking about not prepping in advance. I got here about a half hour before we started shooting from dinner. So, but yeah, she's great. She's actually an artist as well. She's going to be taking over the school in 2 years and a few months when she graduates high school. She already runs like half. And it's cool. I didn't push her into it. It's always a normal question. She's been telling me since she was 6 years old that she wanted to be an artist. She only got serious about it maybe about a year and a half ago. It's dramatically changed in the last maybe 18 months. It's really kind of middle of the road up until then. And then she decided that there's no more time for games. Got serious. It's always the case. Once you're educated, you know what to do, then it's just a matter of how hard are you willing to work? Like, are you willing to like not cut corners anymore and cheat yourself? And you know, once she turned that corner, and that's just a decision. That's not like you have to like you don't have to do anything except for decide. Once you make that decision, everything flows from it. I think I've got all of my lights laid in here. I've now got to go around and start breaking down some of my edges. Relatively even. So a lot of the stuff that's in here in the shadows, like the nostrils, and those things I'm going to go put in a later pass. I'm not even going to do them now. They'll go in when I glaze, and they'll be really easy to lay in. For now, I'm just going to stay in these lights. I'm going to grade these edges, the ones that are supposed to be gradients. I'll grade them, and that'll help to explain the form. It'll round out her face. And then I'll drop in some highlights, which will further round out her face. And then all that'll be left will be filling in some of these gaps, which I'll do in a subsequent pass. Okay. So I'm actually going to use, so I was using, can they see the palette? Yep. So I was using this value to fill everything. I'm now going to jump to this value on my brush to help me dissolve these lights into the background. It's not a perfect match, but I think the jump from what's down into the background is going to be too much. So I'm going to start here. It's a little bit darker, not much. And see how that goes. And if it's not enough, I'll go one value darker. So I'm just going to kind of run this edge. It's not going to grade quite enough. I'm going to test this one, see if this gives it to me, and if it does, then I'll go with this. If not, I'll kind of make a mixture between these two. Yeah, I think that'll work. So again, not a lot of paint on the brush, very small amount of paint. And I just want to go around and I want to soften these edges. Just kind of grade them down so that they are rounded instead of sharp. Right, so this is how we create turns in the form, having the disparity between a sharp edge and a graded edge. I want to make sure that the gradients are soft. I don't want them to be any real jumps in them. So mixing it on the board. Not gonna be perfect, but they'll do the job. And again, there's going to be glazing going in on top of this, so I'm not really worried about it being absolutely perfect. Just want to get it to a place where it looks nice, where I'm turning my form, feels three-dimensional, and then I'll stop there. I won't push it any further. It really won't need to be pushed further than that. And this is where the fact that these colors string together, blue, less blue, less blue, right? It goes from more blue into more violet. And so as I string them together, this blends into this, and so on. This isn't going to give me a photo quality face, but it is going to give me a three-dimensional face. It's going to feel rounded and three-dimensional, and that's all I'm looking for right now. All of the details I can put in later on, the things that'll really bring the face to life, can go in a subsequent pass. Doing is manipulating edges, right? We were talking before about values and edges right now. So even though this isn't grayscale, it may as well be. It's just a scale of grayish blues. So let's just imagine it's gray. We'll talk about it as values. I place my values, at least a base value, one for a light, one, and the shadow is already down as the canvas. So I've got one shadow value, one light value. I've now turned my attention to my edges, right? We were talking about when I talk to a student about what they're doing. I look at their values first, then I look at the edges, then I look at the colors. The colors are already done. There's nothing to do about them. I've established my values, and now I've turned my attention to my edges. I'm going to work all of my edges until I'm happy with them, and then I will turn my attention back to values. I start to flesh out what's going on in the lights.
Got a question from Emma about what you're just sharing.
Yes.
She said darker and also more saturated.
Or what we're referencing, darker and more saturated.
Sorry, Emma, if you can clarify your question, that'd be great. I was a little distracted as I was setting up adjusting the camera there.
I'm using very small amounts of paint as I'm doing this. Just enough to manage my edges, nothing more. Every gradient is as soft as the others, so I'm being thoughtful. The gradient in here is not very soft, like the gradient in here is, the gradient in here is. So I'm trying to manage them so that they're not identical. I want them to all have a kind of a feel that fits them the way they are in the photograph. And again, this is where the reference material becomes valuable. I can watch what's going on with these edges, manage them as I go. Clarification on that question.
Still waiting on one. Okay, so she's asking about the palette.
Yes.
The darker of those two colors
Okay.
that you're using right now, is that one more saturated? And if so, was it intentional to be that way?
It is a little bit more saturated, not much. Yeah, it's actually a tiny, these two start to get, or actually this starts to pick up the saturation. This is a little bit more and this is a little bit more. This one has a little bit more of a mixture of violet in it, where this has less violet and this is even less violet. And so they also have less white in them, or less gray. As they get darker, there's more of the color. And what I'm working on is that as I get darker, I'm getting closer and closer to marrying it to the background color, which is very colorful. I don't want to have a gray sitting against this. So this is kind of a half measure between these very gray lights and the very colorful background. Now, mind you, it's not going to stay this way. I'm going to glaze it. I'm going to marry this head to the background later on with a glaze of color. But for now, I'm trying to establish in a very subtle way. But yes, they do, because this one is most chromatic. This is a little bit less. This is a little bit less. This is a bit of a jump to a pretty substantial gray. And then these two as well, very gray. Good eye.
Awesome, thank you.
Good eye to see that. Again, very, very small amounts of paint going down. Just enough to make the edges break down. Not looking for anything more than that. I overwrote something that should be darker in here, so I'm going to put it back.
Fun question for you.
Yes.
Are you a fan of comic book art?
You know what? I don't see a lot of comic book art these days, but when I was younger, I was. There's some really amazing artists in that arena. Some really incredible stuff. I appreciate it, but you know, my mind is in other places. I don't have time. I don't have time to do everything I want. You know, and so I have to pick and choose. And comic books, they're not a priority. I do see some art. I have a couple of people that who show me art that's being done. Some of it's professional comic book, and some is just artists who are doing their own thing. It's comic book style, but just some really beautiful stuff. There's some great stuff out there, but unfortunately, I don't have the time to really be spending my time with that. You know, between Evolve and everything else, my energy, my time is just, it's very limited. So, but I do enjoy. I enjoy all good art. You know, I mean, it's that simple. If it's good art, it's hard not to appreciate. I mean, you see the amount of labor that goes into it, not just to develop the skill, but to produce the actual drawings or the paintings or the sculptures or whatever they are. I have a real appreciation for beauty, and so, you know, anybody producing something beautiful in art catches my attention. As you can see, the face is rounding out. And I haven't put any highlights. I mean, it was just a flat graphic just a couple of minutes ago. And it's already starting to round out nicely. Start dropping those highlights and it's going to really turn a corner. Again, I scale down the brush to the kind of marker that I need. Generally work with the largest, my rule is I work with the largest brush that will fit. The brush I was using won't fit into this space and give me the marks that I need. So I've scaled down. Immediately move back to a larger brush the moment that I'm done with a mark that requires this brush.
Here's an interesting question
Yes.
related to you as you're moving forward in your, or you're moving towards retirement. Will new students in the Evolve program within the next year be able to take advantage of your guidance, or will you have transitioned out by then?
Well, my retirement is just from the school, right? I'm not the kind of person, I can't put my feet up on put my feet up at the beach for more than like 15 minutes before I started to get stir crazy. So retirement for me just means that I don't have to work. I don't have to show up. If I don't want to be someplace on Wednesday, I don't have to be. But I love sharing this. I love doing this. I love sharing it with people. I love seeing other people who don't believe they can do this turn that corner and realize that their ability is limitless if they're willing to put in the work. I love being part of it, and so I don't see myself ever actually stepping away from it, like ever. Until I'm not able to anymore, I'll continue to do it. So no, people will always have access to me, as long as I can make that happen. Maybe a little bit diminished. I may be talking to you from Paris instead of New Jersey, in a live chat, but no. I mean, like I said, for me, this is personal to me. I do this because I love it. I don't teach as a job. The fact that I get paid to do it is incredible to me. So yeah, I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to worry about that.
Ryan said, "Thank you, Kevin. That is incredibly reassuring. Found you online several months ago, but won't have the bandwidth for class until later this year. That's great news. Thank you, sir."
My pleasure. Trust me, I'll be around. And I'm not in the homework rooms as much as I used to be. And a lot of the time I go. It's funny. So in Evolve we have homework rooms, we have chat rooms, and people will go. And my phone will chime every time somebody goes into one of the rooms. And if I'm available, I'll go in 5-10 minutes later. Most of the time the person goes in, there's no one there, and so they leave. We encourage everybody, if you're going to be doing your work, your Evolve homework, turn on your phone and just leave it on. Stay in the chat room. I go in all the time 10 minutes after somebody's gone in and they've left the room. But I've had a few times where I've gone into the room and I've spent 2 hours talking to one person in the program, just hanging out. I'm sitting there, I'm doing work on my computer, but I have them live, and they want to be with a 2-hour conversation with me. I'm looking at their work, I'm going through stuff with them, and it's like, I don't get to do it that often these days, but if and when you get into the program, make sure you spend your time in the homework rooms. First of all, there's a great crowd of people in Evolve, and they're all in there and they're all looking to help each other. But from time to time, I drop in, and like I said, very often these days when I stop by, it's 1 or 2 people, and they basically have my undivided attention. And like for me, that's a lot of fun. I like those small groups. I don't do it on purpose, just kind of plays out that way. But all too often, somebody will jump into the room, and then when they see there's no one there, rather than just sticking around, they jump. They shut it off and they just go about their work. I show up a few minutes later and they're gone already, and they could have had a long time hanging out with me. So, but definitely when you get into the program, make sure you take advantage of that, and that's for everybody. I assume everybody who's on this live stream that's in Evolve does our homework rooms. I'd be surprised if anybody was here that doesn't. Just finessing these edges. Once I've got these done, I have to deal with the edge of the hair. But you can see this face is actually rounding out. I'm not worried about the fact that these colors are a little bit kind of murky right now. I'm going to do a lot of things in here, and I'm going to be building up these colors. When I glaze, I'm going to marry these things. But for now, I'm just looking to play with the values and the edges. Again, it's just a 2-value graphic right now, but look at how 3-dimensional it is. It's starting to come around. And again, this is the power of understanding the components, the moving parts. Understand how to create form with these 2 simple components. And so it's really straightforward. I mean, I've literally only painted in the lights, and I'm starting to round out this form. This, I'm really just managing the edge of the hair, so that later on when I put the hair in, this edge will already be softened to account for the softness of the hair. Just trying to make sure I'm placing this properly. I'm actually looking at the other reference at the moment, trying to place this. There's a gun in here that I've got to account for. Messing up that part of my drawing. This one down as well. In here, I'm just going to make sure all of my sharp edges are sharp enough. This value is intact in the places that I want it. Later on. This will allow me to push back into some of these areas that have gotten a little bit murkier than I want. Just further creating gradients. But I'm working just with the same 2 shades and the blank canvas, or the toned panel right now. I'm using those 3 things to create an impression of a lot more than I actually have. And I'm keeping it simple by doing that, not allowing it to become complex, right? With just a couple of shades, right? I have 2 shades and then the tone of the canvas. That's only 3 things that I have to juggle. It keeps it very simple for me. Every shade that I add complicates the equation. Again, I'll manipulate these 2 shades up here until I wind up where I want to be. And once I get there, then I'll move on and I'll start moving into my brighter lights. And at that point, it should be pretty straightforward to push this painting to completion for the night. The gradient down here is soft. Again, I'm just moving back and forth between these. I'm thinking about my edges. Again, I was asked about softening things. So I'm going on this edge and I'm softening it. I'm not really creating a gradient. I'm just kind of blurring the edge a little bit. I did the same here. I did the same inside of the mouth, the lip. Just blur the edge. And all I'm doing is I'm putting the darker shade that I would make the gradient with, just kind of tapping it on the edge of the lip where that sharp edge is. And it softens it just a little bit. It doesn't have to be very soft. I don't want it to be a blur. I'm just softening it enough that the lip feels a little bit more natural. Right now, this is very graphic. The sharp edges are so sharp. So I do want to knock them down a little bit. Not all of them. Some of them I'll actually leave. I'll leave intact. But not everything needs to be that sharp. And I'm kind of making the decision as I go. Like, it feels too sharp for me, so I'm making the change. I wasn't really sure where I was going to fall on that before, but now I'm kind of feeling like these edges could benefit from being knocked down a little bit. Again, it's not everyone. Some of these edges I'm actually going to leave relatively strong. So I've got this little area in here that's fighting with me. It's been fighting with me from the very beginning. I'm not really sure why, but I'm going to just lay this in and I'm going to, right, for some reason the paint's not, it's just not playing nice. So I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive in this area as I kind of push in and make this gradient. I know I'm going to have to manage that a little better later on. When I get to my glazing, I'm going to have to do a little bit of extra work in here to bring it in line with what it actually should be based on the photo reference. And in this case, the photo reference is what I want. I want this little bit of sliver of light to be compressed between shadows. But for some reason, it is fighting with me, and it's not giving me what I want. So I'll deal with it. I know I'm going to have to deal with it later on. It seems like everything I do, I'll fix one problem and it generates another problem. And so the best thing to do in that case is to just let it sit. I'll push it to a place where I'm like, okay, it's not doing any harm, and then I'll just leave it there. And I'll plan to pick it back up when I come in and do my glazing. I'll deal with it at that point. And for the most part, I should be able to deal with it just with glaze. I may find that it requires some opaque paint, but I'll manage it at that time. Just softening edges. What time is it?
It is 9:45.
Yeah, you're doing just fine. Just, I'm not blending things. I'm just laying down another value right on the edge of these lights. Diffuses them just ever so slightly. Makes everything feel a little bit more rounded. This edge isn't smooth. It's a gradient, but it's like textured. And so as I put my paint in to create this gradient, I'm actually going to tap the brush, and that's going to give me a bit more, it's going to break the edge down, and at the same time, it'll kind of create a gradient but build texture into it. And you kind of see as I do that. I'm trying to make it very smooth. I'm letting some of the brush marks stay intact. Just builds that nice little texture. On this side of the face, the light is so even, all the gradients are soft. But on the back side, coming from this direction, it's a raking light. So as it goes around the skin, it shows every little mark, every little indent and bump and everything that's in the skin. It winds up with these little highlights. It builds a lot of texture into that edge. And so I don't want it to be too smooth. It'll look like plastic. Right, and it smooths out down in here a little bit and then gets textured again here. So just pay attention to that. I'm not going to take the texture out entirely, but I am going to smooth it a little bit. Again, you have to pay attention to these things, what the edge looks like, right? Because all the edges are not the same. They do have variations. This is not really a gradient, it's just a soft edge. It has a lot of texture right here. So I'll go back in, now that I've laid that down, I'm just going to go back in, I'm going to make sure the inner edge is mostly just this darker shade. I'll do the outer edge out here and make sure that it's kind of smoothed out a little bit, neutralized a little. So I don't wind up with a hard jump between the value of the panel and the value of the light. I don't want this darker shade to be like a line in between. I want it to dissolve in both directions. Still going to have some texture, but it's not going to hold its own space. Sense. Building up those lights significantly. Get into, as I start building up the highlights, those are going to get very, very bright. The brightest values that I have in the painting.
David Prickett just joined the chat. He said, I had an epiphany a while ago over a misunderstanding of a definition that maybe Kevin could expand on. The first, he's going to take two words and kind of break them down. So the word is complementary. You have complementary spelled with an I, which is to flatter or to be favorable with or to something, and it's the definition that most interior designers are looking for, as in, these red flowers go with the blue drapes. Right. The other complementary is spelled with an E, complementary, and it's based on a Greek word meaning to complete or to use all of the components. In mixing paints or pigments, it means to use all the primary colors, used to desaturate or to make mud. When using all the colors of lights from a prism, it creates a pure white light.
Is there a question in there, or just a
No question.
just an explanation of
Just
something you came
an
across?
observation, and wondering if you have any thoughts to add.
No, not particularly. Not particularly. I appreciate you going out and you coming across something and sharing it. That's always nice. You know, a lot of these things, like I can paint. I know what I'm doing. I don't have the jargon necessarily. I find that a lot because I wasn't trained. You know, I figured out a lot of this on my own, and so nobody taught me the words to use, and so I'm kind of a brute where that's concerned, kind of a savage. For the longest time, I insisted on using the word shades instead of values because it just didn't feel right when I said it. But you know, a lot of these things, I believe that, you know, again, like the language is nice. It's nice to have things like this. But it's like, what does it do when you apply it here? Like, does it make a difference here to have that information, right? And I talked about like color theory, books on color theory, and books on perspective, and an education on anatomy. Like, those things are nice, but like, what do your eyes do for you? Like, do you understand how to process what you see? Most of these things you can figure out if you just look hard enough and think deeply enough about what you're dealing with. And it's like, information like that is great to backfill, so that when you're speaking to somebody, you know what you intend to say, you know why you're saying what you're saying. Like, the language matters because it's how we communicate. But from the standpoint of doing this, it's just nice to kind of backfill information. Like, we use the terms complementary colors, and it's like, well, what do we mean, right? And so typically when we talk about complementary colors, we're talking about opposites on the color wheel, right? But there's a lot more to it than that. And again, you have analogous colors and you have complementary colors, and there's a lot of language. And to me, I try to stay away from the language as much as I can because I find that people focus on the language and they forget about the application, right? It's got to get the language, the vocabulary. To me, I just see it like sit down and paint. Don't worry about all of that data, like that information. If you understand how to move this around, you don't have to have the right language. You just need to understand this. It's not going to stop you. I mean, for years, I didn't understand any of the language, right? I didn't have any of it. Didn't stop me from working, didn't stop me from producing at a professional level. And so for me, again, I'm a big fan of education, but for me, like, my focus is not in the language. That probably should be more as an instructor. But like, you do the Evolve program, you see any of these things that I do, I try to speak in a language that anybody can understand. Doesn't matter whether or not you've ever been in an art class or anything. I try to speak in terms that anybody walking in can understand, which is why I try to shy away from discussing even Evolve in these videos, because this isn't for Evolve students, it's for everybody. I want anybody who comes in to be able to sit down and say, oh yeah, I got something from it, that made sense. Yeah, I've never painted before, but I understood what that was, or I've never done anything like that, but I now know how to take that and kind of implement it in what I was doing. It doesn't require an elevated education to be able to do it. And I find, for me, like, language is very often used to separate people, right? I can tell you that it's been my experience years back when I would be in a crowd of other artists, that certain artists would use as much art language, lingo, as they could, because it elevated them amongst their peers, at least in their mind, right? And they sounded like they knew so much more. Didn't make them better artists, right? So again, like, I appreciate don't get me wrong, I appreciate the language, I appreciate that, but stay focused on your work, stay focused on your eyes on your paint, brush in your hand, right? That's really where you want to be as you're developing your skills. Like, at this point, I'm bouncing back and forth between these different shades, and I'm trying to make sure all of the things that I need dissolved edgewise are dissolved. I just want to say, well, who was that wrote that in?
That was David.
David. And David, I don't want to give the impression, like, I kind of sounds to me like as I'm talking, it sounds like I'm saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. That's not the case. For me, I don't worry about the language. I don't worry about the language. I mean, it's interesting, but I don't worry about it. If you're curious about it, it's a good thing that you go and investigate it.
Yeah.
I don't want to give the impression, like, it can sound like I'm like, oh, don't do that. I'm not saying that at all. I just want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Yeah.
And I do appreciate you sharing it. It's not something you would ever hear me talk about, and so you sharing it makes it available to everybody that watches the video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, David shared, I work a lot with interior decorators, and I was stuck on their definition of it.
Sure.
And so it really helped me understand mixing paints, and I was hitting a block. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's good to step back and revisit definitions of terms that we use all the time.
We communicate with them, and you can wind up, one of the things, like, when you study anything, but I mean art in particular, it's important to study in one place, right? Because the language, the language and the definitions of every word are a constant in one place. But if you take that information, you go someplace else, the language is used in different ways, right? And just like interior designers and painters, right? The same word is used in a different way. And so studio to studio, the language is kind of bent and twisted based on the ideas of the instructor. And so you understand value or chroma or hue or any of these words, like halftones. I never use that term. I don't believe in them. They're like unicorns. But most places where you would get an education in painting, halftones are something you must understand. The truth is that halftones happen naturally just by painting if you understand the components the way that I put them in front of you. And so if you went from my studio to another, you wouldn't even know what they were. If you went from another studio and came here and I wasn't ever talking about them, you would feel like I didn't understand what I was doing, right? And so it's like language for communication matters, right? But you just want to be careful about like weighing too heavily on it, or leaning too heavily on it in the education. Like the education in painting is earned in painting. It's earned with a brush and a hand, right? So just something, again, something to think about. And again, as I'm working, I'm finessing this. I don't want to leave anything. I don't want to move on to bulking out the lights until all of these darkest lights that I have down and my shadows and my gradients are all intact. Once they're what I want them to be and they look nice, it'll be very easy to block in a few highlights and round out the form and be finished. And so I want to make sure before I start putting those brighter values on that potentially contaminate these nicer, darker areas, I want to make sure I've got everything in place just the way I want it. Takes a little bit of care and finesse. You can't be in a rush. Back. Again, easier to see from a few feet away. Nothing better than getting out of your chair from time to time to look at your work. It's a good bit. And it's like there's a part of me that I have an impulse to just grab this shadow and fill all the shadows. It would be so easy at this point to do that. And it might even be the right thing to do. I kind of committed to the idea of using the tone of the canvas as the shadows in here early on. And so I've not gone in that direction. But I have this impulse to do it as I'm working. I'm kind of fighting it at the moment. It would be very easy to just fill these gaps. It would make gradients very easy. It would neutralize all the variations in the shadows. Kind of like the idea of this showing through. Now, whether or not that's the smart thing to do for the painting, I don't know, right? I'll know later on, kind of when I'm done, I'll know if it was the right move. Comes around. Again, I can always make adjustments if I decide later on that I should have gone a different direction. Right? I'm not stuck with anything. It's about painting, especially with oil paint. There's lots and lots of room to adjust as you go. At any point in the process, if you don't like something, it's very easy to do something about it. Most part, it's not even that much work. As long as you know what you intend, what you want out of the marks you put down, it's not too hard to find your way there. Open it up a little bit. Small fan brush. I've got a lot of texture in here, so I want to start getting rid of it. I'm just going to flatten out these big open fields. The paint moving in one direction. See what the painting is looking like. Also feels like the paint, even though there's nothing in the paint, it's just paint, no medium. Feels like the paint is starting to stiffen up a little bit. So I want to make sure that all of these ridges of paint that were laid down to start are flattened out so that they don't become a problem later on. I don't want to have I only want texture in my painting in the places that I choose to put it, not places where it winds up because I wasn't able to smooth the painting out before it started to dry. I do it with a very small fan brush. Gives me a lot of control. And now that everything is kind of flattened, now I can take a bigger fan brush, which I don't have here. I have a big fan brush. Oh, this one will be fine. A little bit of everything, and this will help to neutralize a little bit as well.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
Her right eye, so our left, is the white of her eye, is that in the light or is that in shadow?
It's actually in shadow. It's actually in shadow. I'm not painting this as a shadow light painting. I'm painting it more as a value painting right now. So I'm not concerned with whether it's a shadow or light from a value standpoint. There's a lot going on in here, maybe building things up. The shadows over here are also going to be lighter than the shadows over here, right? So there's a lot to juggle in here. I have quite a bit of latitude to play with this from a value standpoint in order to get the result I want and to maintain an impression of both light and shadow moving across the subject and confusion as to which things are shadows and which things are lights, right? So this is not falling directly into like how we would normally tackle lights and shadows. I'm not constrained by that. I get to break the rules as I see fit, right? Because I understand the rules, and so I get to kind of play fast and loose with them as I need. I may be, from the standpoint of an education that you've gotten from me, I may not be playing with the rules the way that I've put them in front of you. But the nice thing about being where I am in my ability is that I don't have to follow the rules. Understand them, but I'm not locked into them, not anymore. I'm just gently laying in a little bit more, just a little bit of a lighter shade on top of the darker ones, just to make sure that I've got the soft transitions that I want. And you can see like these little darker areas where this shadow went down. Again, this is why I was saying like it might be easier to just drop this shadow in every place where there's a shadow and then work with that. And I am kind of thinking about it more. I'm just going to step back from the painting and take a look. So again, I'm trying to plan out, like, so where am I going to take the painting? So if I fill the shadows in with this one shade, then I have certain work that I have to do on top of that to bring the painting together. If I leave it vacant, there's other work that I have to do to bring the painting together. And it's like, I'm just trying to decide which path I want to take. I could take either one. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay on the path I originally set for myself. And I'll just see where it goes. I'm not, I like the idea of treating this face as a vacant shadow. And so rather than jumping ship on that idea, I think I'm just going to stick with it. I'm going to see the painting through that way, and that's what that's going to do is it's going to force me, right, as we move forward, any place where there's an issue, you'll get to see me resolve it. Right, again, if I just paint it in and make it solid, it's basically more of the same of what you've seen if you've watched the portrait. So for me, this is an opportunity for me to show you something a little bit different. Again, I'm going to have to work on this to bring it together. It's going to require a little bit of juggling. And so you'll get to see me juggle a little bit as I move this portion of the painting forward in subsequent passes. Right? And so the idea is to not just show you the same thing over and over, but to give you a broader idea of how to make paintings work. And so I'm going to stick with this path, even though this path seems like it's going to generate a little bit more labor. It's going to force me to work harder. So, which is fine. Dry brush. Just going to go around and just make sure any of these edges that I can dissolve that I do, kind of pull back down to the board. Any of the darker things that are really kind of jumping out. And I'm just trying to get rid of some edges. So I'm going to leave that there. Now I'm going to move in. I think I'm going to start putting in these highlights out here. I'm going to jump way out and do these, and then I'm going to come back in here and turn the form. Actually, I'm going to leave those brighter highlights for the end. They'll be fun when we drop them in at the very end. So I'm now just going to go up the scale one value. Again, I'm gonna leave. Actually, I'm gonna build this up as I go. So again, on this side, there's a lot more texture, and so I have to build the texture in as I put the paint down. I can't leave it till later on necessarily. It's better to build it in as I go. So my marks are a little bit more. They're a little bit more aggressive. Again, I will be breaking these things down a little bit. I'm not going to leave them necessarily this strong. Soften them up as I go. I think this is actually going to be almost the brightest value that I have. So it's so bright compared to everything else. I don't think I'm going to have to go any lighter than this. Right, so this really is going to define the edge of my value scale. Back to the one value back from there, the one that we used to fill everything. I just want to take a look at it. I'm going to work with this and I'm going to lay it down a little bit heavier, which is going to allow me to create another value out of it. Right, so it looks brighter because it's not being mixed with anything. It's just kind of sitting on the surface. Colors. So it's actually giving me a full additional value by doing it this way. It's just that none of this is showing through because it's heavier. Not going to go everywhere. It's only going to go in the places where I perceive brighter light. It's going to help to explain the form better.
Just going to include you in the chat conversation, Kevin. Brian said it's a lifelong dream of his to transition out of engineering career by leveraging artistic gifts, long neglected, sharpened through a program like Evolve.
hoping to open up that door for you.
Yeah, I was thinking he wouldn't be alone in making a transition like that.
No, no, definitely not. Definitely not.
Also,
I meet a lot of people who they're in careers. They wish they were in the arts, but just wasn't in the cards for them when they were young, when they were having to pick a career. And so now, 50 years old or so, looking around thinking they're doing something they don't want to do. And they come across what we're doing here, and they start to believe that it's possible for them to do what they want to do, to make art, something in art, their career. And for me, it's a great thing to be part of that, you know. And it's like, if I can help to make that happen, you just have to let me know what I can do. I mean, you can always email through Evolve, but I'm always happy to help. Nothing worse than being in a job you don't want to be in, not being in the job you do want to be in. You can see, I mean, this is actually I'm putting down some pretty, not heavy paint, but I'm laying it on here. Not very thick, but it's thick enough that it's not blending with what's underneath. Again, you can see not a lot of paint. But put down too much, it just becomes sloppy. What I also do is, as I'm going, if I want to start getting a little bit more subtle, I can always just start blending into what's already down, and it'll neutralize some of the strength of the paint that I'm applying. So I just kind of tailor it back. Cheekbone. So I'm just looking for landmarks as I'm doing this, looking for places where the light's obvious. So this is coming in here.
so you're using the same color to just lay in your lights initially, but just more dense now.
Right, so nothing is showing through it, so it's heavier. Right, this is contaminated because of the gradients. So now when I lay this down, it reads as being lighter. And again, not that much lighter, but light enough that you can see the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll blend beautifully with what's underneath. When I try to dissolve an edge, it'll blend without any problem, right? Because it's the same color, actually. Once I've got this down, I'll dissolve my edges. I think part of it is the paint is just being drawn down into this. It just eats up the paint, pulls it down, pulls the oil and everything into the layer below. This face, it's off in the background. Doesn't have to have the same level of refinement as stuff that's going to go on up here. Right? It can be looser. Leave looser brush strokes. It's going to scale down. So from here, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to build up a slightly lighter highlight. I'm going to grab that lighter shade that I used out here. Just lay it in a few places where I think I need a little bit more pop. Do that before I start blending anything. That way, when I start blending, it'll be part of that. It's funny sometimes when I'm painting, like, all paintings go through like an ugly phase. And every time I paint, I always feel like what I'm doing right now, I'm like, oh, this makes me nervous. I know I can reel it back in, but it's like just throwing paint down, or at least it feels like I'm just throwing paint down, and I'll manage it afterwards. And that can be nerve-wracking. Doesn't matter how much you know or how many times you've been successful playing that game before. There's just a reality to it. It doesn't matter who you are, you run that risk. And so, do you take the risk or not? And like for me, yeah, this is fun. If I only played it safe when I painted, and again, this is not for you when you're trying to learn. Once you know what you're doing, if you play it safe when you paint, it gets boring really fast. Part of how you keep it interesting is constantly pushing the envelope, trying to find, new ways of doing what you're doing that challenge you, force you to think, put the painting at risk. Like if you're doing it professionally, it's a little bit harder to do because everything you're doing for the most part is going out to a client and you've got deadlines. But if you can do it, it's pretty cool to be able to explore while you work. I'm just gonna kind of take the edges down around these highlights I have the same shade on the brush, but I'm just kind of tapping the edges so it's mixing a little bit with what's around it. That'll make it easier for me to create gradients later on. What I'll do is I'll move back to the original shade and I'll start pushing in from the other direction, and that'll help me to. Right, so now I go back to my darker shade. I start with a small amount of paint and I start the edges from the other direction. Application of paint. I'm not using a dry brush to make gradients. It's all application of more and more paint. Makes it rich and juicy.
Hey, Kevin, do you have any advice for when someone doesn't feel like picking up a brush?
Like not being in the mood to work?
Yeah, or not being motivated, or not having the courage or confidence?
Well, you know what? So my advice is that, so if you're afraid to do something, we'll kind of start there. If you're afraid to do something, the best thing to do is to do it. Like even people who have anxiety, what they do with someone who has anxiety is they give them a tiny, tiny morsel of the thing that gives them anxiety, and they let them settle into it. And then once they're settled in, they give them a little bit more and a little bit more. So the idea is like, if you're afraid to do something, the best thing to do is to do it. You don't have to jump in with both feet, but you should dabble, right? If you're afraid to paint, like just do a little bit of it. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to produce masterpieces. They can be nothing but scribbles on a pad, but at least you're doing something. You're doing something, you're not just sitting idle. You know, and it's like the more you think about something, the worse it becomes, right? Like if you have to jump from a height, let's say you're 10 feet off the ground and you have to jump, every second that goes by, it becomes psychologically harder to make the jump if you're afraid. Every second. And so the best thing to do is at the moment that you realize there's something that scares you, jump. Do the thing. Don't wait. Don't let it build up and become something bigger than it is. And so fear can be paralyzing. If you're just not motivated, the best thing to do is to just do it, whether you're motivated or not. Look, I was a professional painter. I painted professionally for 30 years. You know, I say was, because I don't make the majority of my income that way anymore. And so I don't think of myself as a professional painter anymore. It's not what I do for a living. I'm an educator now. And so, but as a professional painter, like you wake up on Monday and you've got a painting due on Thursday, you paint. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how you feel. You paint. You figure it out and you get in and you paint. Right? And so if you don't have, like you don't have a career, you don't have to, it's the same kind of thing. You want to be in shape, you get up and you go to the gym every day, right? Even on the days you don't want to, you make it a habit and you show up. And look, you can go to the gym. I go to the gym and I have days I don't want to be there. I do a half workout and I go home. I do a little bit, but I get in. I don't not go in because like missing one day makes it easy to miss the next, the next, and the next, and the next. So I show up and I do a little bit. And then I go home, right? I don't have to do everything. I don't have to be perfect every day. But I commit the time and the energy and I just do it. And so no different with this. If you want this, like you have to do the work, right? You have to dig deep on the days you don't want to and show up. Mix out your paint. Paint for 10 minutes or mix out your paint to just match your colors and then call it a day. That's enough, right? It's something so that you can say, I did some work yesterday. And even if you make puddles like this and then cover them, the next day come back, you can work with your paint. Now you don't even have to do that. Now you're just going to sit down and do a little painting. And if the painting's a wreck, so what? So what? The next day you'll do something else and maybe it'll be a little better. But the best thing to do for any time that you're like not motivated or afraid to jump into something is to just do it. Not a monumental task, but something small. Start with something simple, one little thing, 1 hour, a half hour, something. You'll find that most of the time, like if you say, okay, you know what, I'm just going to mix the paint, you'll mix the paint, and by the time you're done mixing the paint, you'll be looking at the canvas going, well, I could do a little painting. And then you'll start to paint. And if you don't have anything else on the schedule, you could spend all day painting, right? I mean, that's the nature of a lot of these things. Again, going back to the idea of the gym, there are days I go into the gym, I don't want to do anything. And I know when I'm getting in my car, I'm going to go in and warm up, I'm going to stretch, and I'm going to come home. And then 2 hours later, after a full workout, I'm getting in my car to return home. And what it is I just kind of got in the mood while I was working. But at home, I couldn't do it. It had to happen in the space where the work got done. And so figure out a way to sit down and get something done. I know it's not easy. You know, these things, it's easy to say, and it's not so easy to do sometimes. But commit to doing it. Commit to getting up and allocating a half hour or an hour. Do something. That something will beget something else. All right, so you see, I've actually started to make gradients without blending anything. All I've done is I've been adding more values in between as I go. And this is technically what we call puddling. Again, I have all of these edges. I can just kind of work over them. I'm basically in such a small value range that all I have to do is touch the edges. They go away. Again, this face isn't done. I'm just trying to flesh out a little bit of form. I'm going to go back in when I glaze, and I'm going to make some major, major changes to this. It's going to really come to life. I'm just trying to flesh out the form here, make it feel solid in the sky. Nothing more at the moment. I think I'm actually not going to refine it too much. I think I'm going to leave it a little bit loose, a little bit painterly. Nothing wrong with that. Like, realism doesn't require a painting to have no brush strokes, right? Like for me, a lot of my paintings when I did illustration work, there are no brush strokes. With a magnifying glass, you couldn't find a brush stroke in the work. And there's something to be said for that, as there's something beautiful about it, but there's also something beautiful about having brush strokes. And so I'm not going to worry about cleaning them all up. I'm just going to work, and at some point, I'm going to decide that I like the amount of form that I have. Everything is basically doing its job, and I'm going to stop messing with the painting. I'm just going to stop and let it be where it ends. I'll knock some of the texture down that's here because I don't want texture in the. I don't want strokes going in all kinds of directions, but I won't wipe everything out. I'll leave some of the texture of the paint behind, I think. Some of the kind of juicier brushstrokes will still be intact to a degree. Again, I won't be looking to make it super smooth, I don't think. It's funny, I say that, but the paintings never maintain those marks. Never finish a painting without taking all the brushstrokes out, as much as I want to, as much as I want to leave them in. We'll see how that works out.
Another question here.
Yes.
Do you think 61 is too old to start?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I have one of my favorite students for the longest time was she was coming in, she was early 70s. She'd never painted before. She always wanted to, but she never painted before. And she wanted to learn how to paint so that she could paint her grandkids. That's her entire drive. And I thought, like, could you find a more noble reason to learn? I just thought it was just the greatest thing. And so, no, I mean, at no point. I think Colonel Sanders was like 70 years old when he did Kentucky Fried Chicken. He was up there. And, people pick up new things and become incredible at them every day. Doesn't take that long to learn if you're committed to it. I mean, 350 hours, you can go from knowing nothing to producing professional level work if you stay focused and you do the work. 350 hours is really not that much, right? And so it's like, yeah, I mean, at your age, absolutely. I would jump in with both feet, And for me, like, I do this now, but I'm planning on doing other things. I'm 53. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that I plan on exploring with my life once I've got this behind me and it doesn't require hands-on. And I'm going to do things that I've never done before, completely new. And if I'm going to do them, I want to do them at an elevated level. I don't like doing anything in half measure. Things that I do well because I commit to them. And so when this is no longer my focus, I have things that I've wanted to do my whole life that I've not done, and I am absolutely going to do them. And I'm going to do them with all the energy that I have. I'm going to commit to them. I'm not looking at being a professional at some of these things. I'm just looking at developing my ability to the extent that it can be developed, so that I can enjoy that thing and I can be proud of my effort. I plan on doing that for the rest of my life. That's not going to end. It's not going to end, at 60 or 70 or 80. It's going to end when I can no longer get up and do stuff. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you want to learn to do this, jump in and do it. Don't hesitate, You'll talk yourself, we can talk ourselves in and out of just about anything. If you want this, there's nothing to stop you. Absolutely nothing. Again, as I'm kind of moving the paint around, I'm reassessing where these highlights are and how big they should be. And I'm just trying to make the face feel as round as I want it to feel, like the way I perceive it. And so I'll just continue to manipulate it till it comes around for me. But all I'm doing is I'm painting a little bit, and then I'm stopping to assess, seeing what works and what doesn't, and then going back in and fixing the things that weren't working, and then assessing again. Just over and over, the same process. Again, I lay the values down, and before I start knocking anything down or blending, I step away. I want to see it from a little bit of distance. Yeah. And so it's not as easy, if you don't know where I'm going with this, it's not as easy to see where it's going. But if you know what the techniques are that I'm using, where you'll see where this is leading. I can already see the finished painting in this mess of brushstrokes that I have. See where it's going with the see-through areas and everything else. And so I'm pushing it, again, to a staging point so that the next stage allows me to get it closer to the finish.
Yeah, we got a comment here from CL. The reference is a photo and looks flat. I see both the reference and the painting on a 2D surface, aka my screen, and yet the painting looks so 3D, just so cool. And seeing the two side by side, you can definitely see the likeness between father and daughter, though she is much cuter. Sorry, Kevin.
Yeah, she is. That's okay. I should hope she would be. And just a little bit of paint on the brush, and I'm just trying to knock down some of these edges.
It is 10:40, just so you know.
Really? Wow,
Yep.
that flew. Thanks for the earlier time check. It's been an hour since you told me?
Yeah.
Okay, I gotta kind of polish this. And I'm gonna stop in 20 minutes, regardless of where it is. I think it should be fine. Anything that I don't get done tonight, I will manage when I glaze, right? Because again, like all these things, this is meant to offer you insight, and so I'll push it as far as I can tonight, and wherever I end, that's where I end. And so if I have to manage this painting or things that it was missing, it'll give you the opportunity to understand like a better understanding of how this stuff is built, right? And so I don't mind, I don't want to run over. We'll end on time, about 11 o'clock.
Sounds good.
This comes across. Yeah, I talk to myself a lot when I work. Most of these edges are already knocked down. Again, I'm going with, smaller brush. I'm going to make sure that all of these edges are knocked down. Go in to blend a little bit. I'm not fighting against big value jumps. Everything is mostly established as a soft edge. There's not a lot going on here. These values are so close together. Shouldn't be too hard to blend everything. And again, I'll do that with a dry brush once I've got all this down. You know, Rembrandt said that you don't need to blend. If you paint long enough, it blends itself. And that's what you see going on here. Like as I'm working, these gradients are happening on their own. And again, for those of you who are in Evolve, what you're watching here is puddling. Pushing the paint around, building it up and knocking it down as I go. Building the painting up through the addition of more and more paint. Nothing is simply blended out. It's gradients and all of the things that I need are done through the application, the building up of more and more and more paint. Right. We'll do some blending. Some of these more subtle areas, they're really wonderful just by layering on the paint. Do a little bit less pressure, a little more pressure. These really nice passages, right? They don't need to be knocked down or beat up with a brush later on. Sometimes it's hard to fight the impulse. I can just do a little bit more. I can blend a little more. Very often that ruins a good painting. It's the best at stopping when I should stop.
Evan, do you know any podcasts or something you would recommend to listen to while painting? Sometimes complete silence is a bit too much.
You know what? Just whatever you like. Listen to what you like. Whatever works for you. You know, when I did book covers, I listened to books on tape. That was my thing. I like countless books on tape. So, you know, whatever occupies your mind. You need to have enough going on in your head that you are thinking about the work you're doing. You can't just go to sleep at the wheel. There's lots of there's and whatever you like. I don't actually do podcasts. I don't have time to like sit back and listen to other people talk. There's some really good stuff out there that's been put in front of me, but I don't have the time for it, and so I nothing I can do. I just do without. Yeah, just whatever you like. You know, my taste and your taste are probably not going to be the same for things. So, know that there are, like, I don't think that you would listen to, like, necessarily art podcasts when you seems to me like there's a lot more fun stuff out there to listen to. Just kind of playing with this and trying to.
We're at 13 left.
13. Okay. Again, like I said, I get down to smaller brushes as I get into tighter spaces. I don't work with small brushes all the way through. Small brushes they're really, you want to stay away from them as long as you can. Use them sparingly. And even with a small brush, I'm still applying paint. Doing the application. I think I'm going to just start taking this stuff down. I'm going to start blending, just blending. Figure out what I want to work with. Actually, just messing with a brush right now. This is not a normal brush. I've got the other because I thought it was interesting and I thought it might be nice to play with. So it's a sable. It's very soft, and so it doesn't move a lot of paint. And so for what I'm doing right now, I don't want to move a lot of paint. I want the paint to basically stay where it is, but I want to soften the surface. So this brush will do that, should do that. A little bit clumsy, which I'm kind of liking at the moment because it's not allowing me to be overly critical of my marks. I'm being forced to be more general. Allow me to leave some texture. It blend using this brush. Again, I'm just kind of relinquishing some control to the tool, saying like the tool will only allow so much, and so I have to accept that limitation. Something nice about that. To accept the limitation, because like I said, if left to my own, I'll blend this thing super smooth, take all the texture out of it. There won't be a single brush stroke anywhere. But the truth is, the brush strokes are actually quite nice. I like the way they look, and so the normal brush that I would use for something like this would give me the control to eliminate all those marks. This brush, I don't have that much control over, just the nature of the brush. And so it's forcing me, again, to be a bit more general in what I'm accepting from it.
So will you just let this dry and then start again in the next session?
Yep. I will move on to something else. We'll come back to this. Planets next week, probably. Like, even though this is my daughter, I'm not doing this as a portrait. I want it to resemble her, but I'm not like sweating that. It'll look enough like her, I think. And sitting in the chair, I can't even tell if it looks like her at the moment.
Question from Sandra.
Yes.
Do you find it harder to paint people you know?
I don't see any difference, right? Right, so I don't think of, when I'm doing a portrait, I'm just painting shapes, making color and value choices. right? I'm not thinking about the person. I'm not thinking about my daughter while I'm painting this. I'm looking at the shapes, I'm looking at the values, looking at the edges, I'm looking at all the components that we always talk about. And I'm trying to make sense of them relative to themselves inside of this image, nothing else. I'm not thinking that it's my daughter. It's too much information to manage. And so it's easier to just look at all the shapes, filter what I'm dealing with through those components that I'm familiar with, them to the best of my ability, as faithfully as I can with my understanding, and just wait for my daughter to emerge on the other side of the process. The likeness, right? If I put everything where it goes, all the right values, all the right colors, all the right shapes, my daughter will emerge from this at some point, right? I'll be able to recognize her. And that's all of my portraits are done that way. I don't try to paint faces. I paint the components. The face comes from it. The likeness emerges from the collection of choices that I make. And that's all painting, right? There is no brush for painting a face. There's only a bunch of marks, values, colors, and edges. You make those decisions. And through those decisions, the likeness emerges. I just have to get up and take a quick look. Where are we on time?
It is 10:54.
Okay. So I'm going to go in with a smaller brush, and now I'm just going to soften a few edges that brush was not letting me manage. Again, I'd rather be a little softer than I need to be rather than too sharp. Sharp edges are easy to put in later on, but sharp edges are hard to take out. So I'd rather have something be too soft than too sharp. And so I could go with a fan brush and do it, but again, fan brushes as you hear me say this all the time, they destroy more paintings than just about anything else. They destroy more paintings than bad technique. They're a terrible tool because they're addictive to use. As you use them, you want to use them more and more and more. And one stroke looks nice, the next stroke looks even nicer, the next stroke ruins the painting. And so, like even for me, I tend to stay away from them until the very end of the process. And I'll kind of throw it in at the very end because it does offer some things that other tools don't, other brushes don't. And so I do want to take advantage of what it does offer, but I want to limit the risk that it poses. Just trying to make sure all of these edges are soft. I will soften them further with a fan brush, but I don't want too much paint to be, I don't want the fan brush to be able to grab a hold of this paint. And so I'm really kind of flattening it out and softening everything so that when I use the fan brush, I can use it in a very limited capacity. I don't want to use it to move around too much paint. And so I don't have a big fan brush. They're just kind of drop in those highlights, I think, too, once I've got this done. Right, you can see everything gets kind of a little bit more neutralized by doing this. Anything that I want that I want sharper, I'll just put in the next pass. It'll be very easy to drop in sharp marks. I'm just going to go in, I'm going to put in those highlights. Just let them kind of sit on the surface. I'm not going to blend them. I'm going to stop right there. Just going to soften a little bit of those edges. Leave it at that.
We are coming up to 11, Kevin.
Yep. I'm just touching these little things right here, and then I'm done. So I left this in a good place to stop. I'll be able to push this over the finish line nicely. Probably not in the next pass. The next pass I'll be able to get a lot done, but it is going to take 2 more passes probably to really polish this off. I won't do it until I've got a lot more going on in the painting because I don't want to do so much. It'll be so easy if I do just the face first to make the face way too prominent for what I want in the painting. So right now this is going to hold the space beautifully while I start moving forward in the painting. She feels like she's going to be nice and set back. She's not going to move forward too much in the piece. And so I don't want to start establishing anything too strong until I have more in place. She may get finished before this figure gets done, the one up front. But I definitely want to get the planets and probably even the mountains in before I polish her off. And I may just do that. I may just finish off the entire background before I do the foreground. But we'll kind of play it by ear as we go. So anyway, if we don't have any questions.
No questions?
No? Okay. Well, we'll call it a night. Thank you, everybody, for coming out, and see you next week.
Great. Take care, everybody.